Hello, I'm Emily Puntuzs, and today I'm going to be talking to you about one of my favorite things to talk with students about, and that's finger patterns and fingerboard geography. And the reason I love talking to students about this so much is because once you're really good at using finger patterns, you'll play more in tune and you'll do less work. And who doesn't like to do less work, right? So let me show you what I'm talking about. So when we talk about finger patterns, we're talking about the way we organize the space between our fingers into half and whole steps. You probably already know that a half step is when your fingers are touching, and a whole step is when your fingers are apart. Sometimes we do put our fingers more than a whole step apart, but that doesn't happen in a major scale, so we're not going to talk about that today. Today we'll just talk about half steps and whole steps. So since we only have 4 fingers that we use when we play the viola or the violin, there are only a certain number of patterns that we can create using half steps and whole steps. For example, we could put the half step between finger 2 and 3. That's probably the first finger pattern that you learned when you learned to play your instrument. If you're a Suzuki student, that's the pattern you used when you played Twinkle. So I have a half step between my 2 and 3, the 2 and 3 are touching, and whole steps between the other fingers. Or I could put the half step between finger 1 and 2. If you've learned to play a low 2, or if you're a Suzuki student and you've learned to play Bohemian folk song or etude, then you know this finger pattern. Or I could put the half step between finger 3 and 4. If you're a Suzuki student and you've played Minuet 2, or if you've learned how to play a high 3, then you know how to use this finger pattern. Or I could make no half steps at all and just put the fingers, all of them, a whole step apart. I could also do this finger pattern, where there's 2 sets of half steps, but that doesn't happen in a major scale either, so we won't talk about that one today. Now, in order to talk about these finger patterns, we need something to call them. When you're older, you might use numbers, but today we're going to be using colors. If you're familiar with Barbara Barber's Fingerboard Geography book, then you've heard about these colors before. And I always tell my students there's nothing special about these colors. She could have given them any colors she wanted, but these are the ones she chose. And it's a good way for us to talk about them and remember them. So the pattern where our finger 2 and 3 are together, we're going to call that the red finger pattern. When our 1 and our 2 are together, we'll call that the blue finger pattern. When 3 and 4 are together, we'll call that the yellow finger pattern. And when they're 4 all apart, we'll call that the green finger pattern. Now, let's see how we might use those patterns on our instrument. So I'm going to show you an activity that you can do to practice the finger patterns on your instrument. And I'm going to show you several different versions, kind of like different levels of this activity. And you can talk to your teacher and find out which one would be the right one for you to be practicing right now. So level 1 would be that I'm going to choose one of those colored finger patterns that we talked about. And first I'm going to choose the red pattern. So that means my 2 and my 3 are going to be together. And I'm going to play that red pattern on every string on my viola. So I'm going to start on my C string. And of course, if you're on a violin, you'll start on your G string. And the rules of this game are that I'm not allowed to use any open strings. And I'm going to play every finger on every string using the red pattern. When I get to the top, I'm going to give my 4th finger an extra turn. You'll see what I mean. And the reason I'm going to do that is so that later on, when I'm better at it, I can practice doing it with slurs and I'll have the right number of notes so that my slurs come out even. Okay, so here I go. I'm going to play a scale, starting with 1st finger on my C string, using only the red pattern, and it's going to sound really funny. It won't sound like any scale that you've ever practiced before. Okay, so here I go. And I could repeat that using each pattern. So I could use the blue pattern. Etc. Or I could use the yellow pattern. another way I can play the yellow pattern. If you're in maybe book 2 or on into book 3 of Suzuki, you might have played the yellow pattern where you start on your low 1. And you use your low 2 and your low 4. Still yellow pattern though, because the 3 and 4 are still touching. You could do it with the green pattern too, but probably the red, blue, and yellow would be the best ones to practice at first. So level 2 would be to mix up the patterns. And a fun way to do that at first is to just pick a color for each string, whichever color you want. So let's see, I'm going to say my C string is going to be red, and my G string will be blue, and my D string will also be red, and my A string will be yellow. So I have red, blue, red, yellow. Let's see if I can do it. This will sound even crazier than the scales we did a minute ago. Pretty crazy, right? Sometimes with my students, we play a game where they choose the colors and they don't tell me which ones they're thinking of, and I have to try and guess and see if I can tell what they were thinking of. So that's level 2. Ready for level 3? In level 3, I'm going to choose a key signature, and I'm going to choose the key of C major. Now, you might know that C major doesn't have any sharps or flats. So I'm going to think about what notes I would play in the key of C major on my viola in first position. On the C string, I'd be playing D, E, F, and G. So that's the red finger pattern because my E and F, my second and third fingers, are touching. On the G string, I'll also be playing the red finger pattern, A, B, C, and D. On the D string, I'll be using the blue pattern, E, F, G, and A. And on the A string, also the blue pattern, B, C, D, and E. Now, of course, if I'm playing the violin, I would start on my G string. So when I get to the E string, I would be playing the green pattern, F, G, A, and B. But I'm going to show it to you on my viola. So I'll be playing red, red, blue, blue. Now you remember back at the beginning I said that when you're really good at using the finger patterns, you won't have to work as hard. And that's because when you use the finger patterns, your brain only has to give one instruction and all 4 of your fingers will know where to go. So if you think, oh, that's the red finger pattern, then all of your fingers know where to go. Instead of thinking, okay, so that's an F sharp, so that means it's a high 2, and giving an instruction for each of your 4 fingers. You don't have to give 4 instructions, you can just give 1. And someday when you need to play a whole bunch of notes really, really fast, you'll be able to do that quickly and easily because you can organize your hand using the finger patterns. So I have one more activity to show you, and it's kind of a bonus activity. And that's because in all of this talking about finger patterns that we were doing, for the most part, we weren't really talking about the names of the notes, were we? And that's okay, because when you're playing, you don't really have to think of the names of the notes as you're playing. But it is really important to know the names of all the notes and where each note is located on your viola. So here's a fun way that you can practice that. I'm going to think about my first finger, and I'm going to think about my low first finger. If I put it on my C string, I could call it C sharp, or I could call it D flat, right? Let's take the sharps for a minute. So that would be C sharp. When I hop over to my G string, that's G sharp. Then I have D sharp and A sharp. Or I could call it D flat, A flat, E flat, and B flat. Now, if I move to my first finger just in the usual position, we might call that the regular one. My students call it that sometimes. That would be D, A, E, B. My low two would be E flat, B flat, F, C. So you could challenge yourself, kind of make a little race, see if you can beat your time. How long does it take you to say all the names of the low ones, the regular ones, the low twos, the high twos, the threes, the high threes, and the fours, and maybe even throw the low fours in there too? Time yourself, how fast can you do that? And then see if you can beat your record. If you can get really fast at saying those, that will help you know where the notes are on your strings. And I suppose you could do that in other positions too, if you really wanted to challenge yourself, do it in third position or something. So have fun. I hope that thinking about the finger patterns has been useful to you. I hope it helps you in your playing, and enjoy.